Soil as a filter, analyzing the frequency response of soil to spatiotemporal temperature variation. In agriculture, soil moisture and soil temperature are important variables that can impact a plant's root system and growth. Soil can be thought of as a filter, protecting root systems from daily fluctuations in temperature. The goal of this project was to determine how different soil types from different climates filter out daily sinusoidal fluctuations in temperature using our respective environments as case studies. Experiments took place in California, Maryland, and Washington. This map shows how soil types, categorizing type based on acidity, vary across the United States. Previous research has shown that decreased temperature fluctuation can protect root systems that are sensitive to sudden changes in temperature. By identifying how our respective soil types filter out high and low frequency changes, we can hope to provide a better understanding of which environments might sustain certain plant life better than others.
The team carried out multi-day deployments to measure temperature and moisture. 3 thermistors were hot glued onto a ruler and buried at the surface 2 inches and 4 inches deep to see the filtering effects of the soil. Soil moisture was measured at the surface using a homemade resistive sensor. At the 4-inch depth, an Adafruit capacitive moisture sensor was used. However, the results from the sensor were determined to be unreliable. The image on the left shows the experimental setup at the Maryland site. The image on the right shows our electrical schematic for the experiment. Besides the sensors mentioned, we used an SD card reader to log data onto CSV files for data analysis.
One method used to analyze the filtering effects of soil was peak event analysis. The day-night cycle produced peaks in temperature data like the one shown below. Through careful analysis of these peak events, observations could be made about how thermal energy was transmitted through the soil. The surface temperature was interpreted as an input signal, which was then passed through the soil system. By measuring the initial and maximum temperatures, we were able to determine the amplitude of the peak. Then, by finding the points where the temperature had risen to 10, 50, and 90% of the peak, we had a rough estimation of the shape of the curve. This process was repeated for the 2-inch and 4-inch curves. Attenuation was then determined by comparing the amplitudes of the curves, and phase shift was determined by comparing the 10, 50, and 90% points on the curves. The phase shift, which measured the delay between the surface signals and the 2-inch or 4-inch signals, indicated the time it took for heat to spread to different depths. As expected, this phase shift was greater for the 4-inch deep signals than it was for the 2-inch signals across all sites. Overall, phase shifts were smallest in Washington, indicating that the heat spread quickly through the soil, and greatest in Maryland. Attenuation, which was the ratio between the range of deeper temperatures and the range of surface temperatures, indicated what fraction of the total heat reached the deeper soils. As expected, less heat reached the 4-inch sensors than the 2-inch sensors across all sites. Interestingly, on average, at 2 inches, the temperatures were reduced by little more than half, but at 4 inches, the temperatures were reduced by more than a sixth, indicating that attenuation increased non-linearly with depth.
In addition to the 10%, 50%, 90% heuristic for determining phase offsets, we analyzed the soil like a system, in which the input signal was the temperature at the surface and the output was the temperature at the 2-inch or 4-inch depths. We used the MATLAB system identification toolbox to generate transfer function estimates between the two signals. We were able to get an over 70% fitting model for each of these datasets. The one shown in this slide comes from the second half of the California dataset, with the green signal being what the transfer function estimates based on the blue input signal, which is the surface temperature. Combining all the transfer functions onto a couple Bode plots, we see some really interesting frequency response behavior. For reference, 10 to the negative 5th hertz is around the frequency of a day-night cycle, and frequencies between 10 to the negative 4th and 10 to the negative 3rd hertz encompass the majority of higher frequency events that are seen in the data. So, slower changes in temperature on the order of a day-night cycle exhibit less attenuation but greater phase offset between depths. Higher frequency events on the surface seem to transfer between depths much more quickly. We see a similar trend between all the plots, with the exception of the Washington 4-inch data, since we are unable to get a good fitting transfer function for that particular case. But ignoring that single case, each of our soils can be thought about as if they have different properties, like the values of a resistor and capacitor in an electrical high-pass filter. And depending on what kind of soil you're working with, the filter will operate the same, just with slightly different frequency response behavior.
In conclusion, we found that lower frequencies, such as day-night fluctuations in temperature, showed larger phase shifts of about 0.26 radians, while higher frequency changes showed little to no phase shifts. The soil in Maryland showed the largest phase shift, followed by Southern California and then Washington. Approximately same attenuation was observed at all sites, with greater attenuation at greater depths. For future work, we recommend standardizing the testing environment to have the different soil types in a temperature-controlled environment to prevent confounding variables such as varying humidity and temperatures. Categorizing the soil as clay, silt, or sand and by acidity can help produce more generalized and useful results.